Ancient mysteries are not defined by what has been lost, but by what has survived. Across the world, archaeologists have uncovered places where the stones still stand, the tools remain, and the evidence can be measured with remarkable precision. Yet the knowledge that made these achievements possible has vanished almost completely. Every excavation reveals another fragment of the past, but instead of completing the story, it exposes even deeper questions. Thousands of years later, these forgotten places continue to challenge history, archaeology, and modern science, reminding us that the greatest mysteries are often the ones hidden in plain sight. Grumentum, hidden among the mountains of Basilicata in southern Italy, appears today as the quiet remains of an ordinary Roman city, yet archaeological excavations have revealed something far more extraordinary. Beneath its streets lies a forgotten sequence of civilizations built one directly upon another, each erasing, reshaping, and recycling the achievements of its predecessors while never completely destroying them. Rather than representing a single settlement, Grumentum has become a geological archive of human occupation extending across many centuries, preserving traces of the Lucanians, the Romans, the Byzantines, and the medieval inhabitants within the same landscape. Every new excavation exposes another layer of this buried history. Yet despite more than a century of archaeological research, scholars still cannot fully explain how each civilization transformed the city inherited from the previous one, or why so much of its earlier past deliberately disappeared beneath later construction. The earliest occupation of the area dates to the Lucanians, an Italic people who established settlements throughout the mountainous interior of southern Italy during the 4th century BCE. Their community occupied a naturally defended plateau overlooking the Agri Valley, a strategic location controlling routes between the Tyrrhenian and Ionian coasts. Following the Roman conquest during the Third Samnite War and the conflicts surrounding Pyrrhus and Hannibal, the settlement gradually evolved into the Roman colony of Grumentum. Historical sources describe several military campaigns fought nearby, including battles during the Second Punic War, demonstrating the city's strategic importance long before its monumental architecture appeared. Yet archaeology has revealed that Roman builders did not simply construct an entirely new city. Instead, they repeatedly cut through, buried, and reused older Lucanian buildings, foundations, and streets, leaving fragments of an older civilization hidden beneath almost every major Roman structure discovered so far. Modern excavations illustrate this remarkable process with astonishing clarity. Beneath sections of the Roman Forum, archaeologists have identified earlier walls built using local limestone and irregular masonry techniques, characteristic of pre-Roman construction. Under residential districts, traces of Lucanian houses survive only because Roman engineers sealed them beneath new foundations, rather than removing them completely. In several locations, Roman streets sliced directly across older neighborhoods, preserving fragments of rooms, courtyards, and drainage systems beneath their paving stones. This creates an archaeological puzzle unlike a simple sequence of destruction and rebuilding. Instead of abandoning one city before constructing another, generations of inhabitants continuously modified the same urban landscape, producing overlapping layers whose boundaries remain difficult to distinguish even with modern excavation methods. Every trench therefore reveals not one city, but several occupying exactly the same ground. The Roman city eventually expanded into one of the most significant urban centers in inland Lucania. Covering approximately 25 hectares, Grumentum acquired all the characteristics expected of a prosperous provincial municipality. Archaeologists have uncovered an amphitheater capable of accommodating several thousand spectators, a theater built against the hillside, public baths supplied through sophisticated hydraulic systems, temples, markets, warehouses, paved streets, and an organized network following the traditional Roman grid of Cardo and Decumanus. The nearby Via Herculea connected Grumentum with major transport routes crossing southern Italy, allowing agricultural products, ceramics, wine, olive oil, and livestock to move efficiently between inland communities and coastal ports. The city's monumental architecture demonstrates substantial financial investment, suggesting a population that may have reached several thousand inhabitants during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Yet this prosperity introduces one of Grumentum's greatest mysteries, because the economic forces capable of sustaining such development remain only partially understood. Excavated villas display elaborate mosaic floors, painted walls, heated hypocaust systems, marble decorations, and carefully designed courtyards comparable to those found in wealthier regions of the Roman Empire. These luxurious residences clearly belong to affluent families, but remarkably few inscriptions identify their owners. Unlike Pompeii or Ostia, where names preserved on monuments, tombs, and commercial buildings reveal the identities of merchants and magistrates, Grumentum remains unusually silent. Archaeologists know impressive houses existed, yet they cannot confidently determine who financed them, how local wealth accumulated, or which industries supported such prosperity. Agricultural production undoubtedly played an important role, especially grain, vineyards, and olive cultivation across the fertile Agri Valley. But surviving evidence has not fully explained why this inland settlement achieved such prominence, or how its economy functioned with enough stability to sustain expensive public construction for centuries. Equally intriguing is the extraordinary precision of Roman urban planning, despite the challenging terrain. Grumentum occupies uneven slopes rather than a broad, flat plain, yet survey measurements indicate remarkably accurate alignment between major streets and public buildings. Engineers reshaped hillsides through massive earthworks, retaining walls, and artificial terraces that allowed theatres, baths, and civic buildings to fit within a coherent urban plan. The scale of this landscape engineering remains difficult to quantify because later occupations altered many original features. Archaeologists continue debating whether Roman planners completely redesigned the terrain or instead adapted portions of the earlier Lucanian settlement, incorporating pre-existing foundations into their new city. Since much of the underlying architecture remains buried, the full extent of Roman modification cannot yet be reconstructed with certainty. Geophysical surveys have deepened this mystery rather than resolving it. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and electrical resistance studies indicate that large sections of Grumentum remain untouched beneath farmland surrounding the excavated monuments. Buried streets extend beyond currently exposed districts, while unidentified rectangular structures suggest additional public buildings, workshops, and residential neighborhoods waiting below the surface. Only a fraction of the ancient city has been systematically excavated despite decades of research. This means every reconstruction of Grumentum's urban layout remains incomplete, and the true size of the settlement may have been considerably larger than current archaeological maps indicate. Hidden beneath fields that appear completely ordinary today could lie entire districts preserving evidence capable of rewriting the city's history. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns Grumentum's disappearance. During the height of the Roman Empire, it flourished as a regional administrative and commercial center connected to extensive transportation networks. Yet by the 6th century CE, historical references become increasingly scarce, and the city gradually faded from prominence. Unlike Pompeii, it was not buried by volcanic eruption. Unlike many ancient cities, no catastrophic earthquake layer, massive fire destruction, or single military event explains its abandonment. The Lombard invasions, Byzantine political reorganization, changing trade routes, economic decline, and gradual rural migration have all been proposed as contributing factors, but none individually accounts for the city's slow disappearance. Archaeological evidence, instead, suggests a prolonged transformation lasting generations, during which public buildings fell into disuse. Construction materials were recycled, populations dispersed toward more defensible locations, and the once important urban center quietly dissolved into the surrounding countryside. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a thriving Roman city on the banks of the Rhine, vanished so completely that later generations built farms and villages above it, without realizing an entire civilization remained beneath their feet. Unlike Pompeii, Augusta Raurica, in present-day Switzerland, was never buried by volcanic ash, swallowed by an earthquake, or destroyed by a single catastrophic event. Instead, one of the largest Roman cities north of the Alps slowly faded from history while preserving an extraordinary archaeological record beneath layers of soil. Founded around 15 to 20 years before the Common Era, near the strategic crossing of the Rhine River, the colony eventually covered nearly 2 square kilometers and supported an estimated population of 15,000 to 20,000 inhabitants, making it one of the most important urban centers in the Roman province of Germania Superior. What makes Augusta Raurica so remarkable is not simply its size, but the mystery surrounding how an entire city could disappear almost intact without leaving behind clear historical accounts explaining its final decades. The modern rediscovery of Augusta Raurica unfolded gradually rather than through a spectacular excavation. During the 16th century, scattered Roman inscriptions and architectural fragments began appearing in nearby fields, but systematic archaeological work only accelerated during the 19th and 20th centuries. Excavations eventually revealed an astonishingly complete Roman city, preserved beneath agricultural land instead of modern urban development. Archaeologists uncovered paved streets arranged in an organized grid, monumental temples, a forum, residential districts, workshops, warehouses, bath complexes, fountains, water pipelines, drainage tunnels, and one of the best-preserved Roman theatres north of the Alps, capable of accommodating approximately 10,000 spectators. Every new excavation expanded the ancient map, demonstrating that much of the city had remained untouched for nearly 17 centuries. Unlike many famous Roman sites repeatedly rebuilt during the Middle Ages, Augusta Raurica escaped large-scale redevelopment, allowing entire neighborhoods to survive with exceptional integrity beneath only a few meters of accumulated sediment. The greatest mystery is why such an advanced Roman city disappeared without a defining disaster. Historical evidence indicates that Augusta Raurica flourished throughout the 1st and 2nd centuries while serving as a commercial hub connecting Italy, Gaul, the Rhine frontier, and regions farther into Central Europe. Goods, soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, and officials continuously passed through its streets, creating a prosperous economy supported by agriculture, manufacturing, and long-distance trade. Yet, during the 3rd century, the Roman Empire entered one of its most turbulent periods. Civil wars weakened imperial authority, economic instability disrupted commerce, epidemics reduced populations, and repeated incursions by Germanic groups placed enormous pressure on frontier settlements. Written sources mention attacks by the Alemanni around the middle of the 3rd century, but archaeological evidence suggests no single event completely destroyed Augusta Raurica. Instead, buildings were abandoned gradually, neighborhoods emptied over time, and public monuments ceased receiving maintenance. Rather than dying suddenly, the city appears to have slowly dissolved, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct a centuries-long decline whose exact sequence remains uncertain. The absence of a dramatic ending has become one of its greatest historical puzzles, because civilizations usually preserve memories of catastrophic destruction, whereas gradual disappearance often leaves surprisingly few records. Excavations reveal that even during this decline, many structures remained standing for decades before eventually collapsing under natural weathering. Stone blocks were occasionally removed for reuse elsewhere, roofs deteriorated, timber beams decayed, and walls slowly crumbled into their own foundations. Wind, rain, floods from nearby streams, agricultural activity, and centuries of natural sedimentation gradually sealed the ruins beneath the landscape. This unusual process created conditions allowing streets, foundations, drainage systems, workshops, and countless everyday objects to survive in remarkable condition. Instead of preserving a single frozen moment like Pompeii, Augusta Raurica preserves generations of urban evolution, enabling researchers to study how a Roman city functioned throughout its rise, prosperity, crisis, and abandonment. Among the site's most astonishing discoveries is the famous Augusta Raurica silver treasure, one of the largest collections of Roman silver ever recovered. In 1961, archaeologists uncovered a carefully concealed deposit containing nearly 270 silver objects, weighing approximately 58 kilograms, including plates, bowls, drinking vessels, spoons, strainers, serving dishes, jewelry, and hundreds of silver coins. Many pieces display extraordinary craftsmanship, with elaborate mythological decoration and finely engraved geometric designs, reflecting the wealth of the Roman elite. Yet the greatest mystery is not the treasure itself, but why its owner never returned. The silver had clearly been hidden deliberately beneath the ground, rather than discarded accidentally, suggesting someone expected to retrieve it after danger had passed. Whether the owner was a wealthy merchant, a government official, a military commander, or an aristocratic family fleeing violence, remains completely unknown. No inscription identifies its owner, no written document records its concealment, and no evidence explains why nearly 60 kilograms of precious silver remained untouched for almost 1,700 years. Every artifact silently records a desperate decision made during an uncertain period, but the identity of the individual behind that decision has vanished forever. The city's infrastructure reveals another level of sophistication that continues to impress modern engineers. Beneath the streets lies an extensive drainage network, constructed with carefully calculated gradients, allowing wastewater to flow efficiently across the settlement without mechanical assistance. Stone-lined sewers, wells, lead water pipes, cisterns, fountains, and public baths formed an integrated hydraulic system capable of supporting thousands of residents. Some drainage channels remain structurally stable after nearly 2 millennia underground, demonstrating the remarkable precision achieved by Roman surveyors using relatively simple instruments. Archaeologists continue studying construction techniques, mortar composition, foundation engineering, and water management, because many sections exhibit durability exceeding infrastructure built centuries later during the medieval period. Exactly how Roman engineers consistently maintained such precise elevation differences across an expanding city using only manual measurement remains an active field of research into ancient surveying methods. Hidden beneath the forests overlooking the Lima River in northern Portugal lies CitâNia de Santa Luzia, one of the largest and most enigmatic Iron Age hill forts ever discovered in the Iberian Peninsula. Perched approximately 260 meters above sea level on Monte de Santa Luzia, near the modern city of Viana do Castelo, the settlement occupied a naturally defensive position, with commanding views extending toward the Atlantic coast. Archaeological excavations first began in the late 19th century, after local discoveries of ancient stone walls and artifacts attracted scholarly attention. Yet more than a century later, the greatest mystery surrounding the site is not what has been uncovered, but what still remains buried. Modern archaeological surveys estimate that only around 1/3 of the ancient settlement has been excavated, while the remaining 2/3 continues to lie beneath untouched soil, dense vegetation, and later construction. Everything visible today may therefore represent only a fraction of the original city, leaving its true dimensions, population, political organization, and ceremonial landscape unknown despite decades of research. The exposed remains already reveal an astonishing level of urban planning that challenges traditional assumptions about Iron Age communities in northwestern Iberia. Rather than a loose collection of huts scattered across a hilltop, CitâNia de Santa Luzia was organized into carefully defined neighborhoods, connected by paved streets and narrow passageways that followed the natural contours of the mountain. Hundreds of circular, oval, and rectangular stone buildings occupied terraces carved into the hillside, many grouped around enclosed courtyards and linked by sophisticated drainage channels that reduced erosion on the steep terrain. The settlement covered more than 15 hectares, although geophysical investigations suggest its original extent may have been significantly larger before centuries of agricultural activity and natural erosion altered the landscape. Such planning required generations of coordinated labor, engineering knowledge, and centralized decision-making, yet no written records survive to explain who designed the settlement, how construction was organized, or which authority directed a project of this remarkable scale. Perhaps the most striking feature of CitâNia de Santa Luzia is its extraordinary defensive architecture. The visible ruins preserve multiple concentric stone ramparts surrounding the settlement, with at least 3 principal defensive walls reinforced by towers, gateways, and strategically positioned lookout points overlooking the surrounding valleys. These fortifications were constructed entirely from locally quarried granite blocks, fitted together without mortar, relying instead on precise placement and immense weight to maintain structural stability for more than 2,000 years. Some surviving sections still rise several meters above the surrounding terrain, despite continuous weathering since the late Iron Age. Archaeologists estimate that constructing these defensive circuits required moving thousands of tons of stone uphill without iron machinery, wheeled cranes, or draft-powered lifting equipment capable of handling such loads on steep slopes. The engineering itself demonstrates remarkable planning, yet the logistics remain poorly understood. No evidence has revealed how many workers participated, how long construction required, whether labor was seasonal or permanent, or how food and resources were supplied during decades of continuous building. The architecture inside the walls raises even deeper questions. Many houses follow the distinctive circular design associated with the Castro culture of northwestern Iberia, yet others adopt rectangular floor plans that appeared later, suggesting continuous rebuilding across several centuries. Numerous structures include entrance vestibules, internal hearths, storage spaces, and carefully paved floors, indicating permanent occupation rather than temporary refuge during conflict. The precision with which many walls were assembled reflects highly developed stone masonry techniques, while the standardized dimensions of certain residential compounds imply that builders followed shared construction principles. Even so, archaeologists still debate why circular architecture dominated the region for centuries, despite requiring more complex masonry than rectangular buildings. Whether the shape reflected engineering advantages, cultural identity, religious symbolism, or social organization remains unresolved, because no contemporary texts explain the reasoning behind these distinctive designs. Excavations have recovered thousands of artifacts that reveal extensive trade connections extending far beyond the settlement itself. Pottery, iron tools, bronze ornaments, glass beads, spindle whorls, millstones, and imported Roman materials demonstrate that CitâNia de Santa Luzia participated in commercial networks stretching across the Iberian Peninsula and eventually throughout the expanding Roman world. Chemical analysis of certain ceramics suggests that some vessels originated hundreds of kilometers away, while imported goods indicate sustained contact with distant communities long before full Roman integration. Yet these discoveries introduce another mystery rather than resolving existing ones. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that the settlement flourished during the late Iron Age, before gradually experiencing Roman influence after the 1st century BCE. But the precise nature of that transition remains unclear. Did Roman authorities conquer the settlement by force, negotiate alliances with local elites, or simply absorb an already prosperous community into a wider economic system? The archaeological layers preserve evidence of both continuity and change, making it difficult to determine where indigenous traditions ended and Roman administration truly began. The incomplete excavation of the site further complicates every interpretation. Remote sensing techniques, aerial photography, and geophysical surveys continue to detect buried walls, roads, and structural anomalies extending well beyond the exposed archaeological zone. Some underground features appear large enough to represent public buildings or communal gathering spaces that have never been excavated, while others suggest entire residential districts still hidden beneath the surface. Because only a fraction of the settlement has been investigated, every estimate regarding population remains provisional. Some researchers suggest several thousand inhabitants may once have occupied the hill fort during its peak, while others argue for a substantially smaller community spread across multiple construction phases. Without exposing the buried sectors, neither interpretation can be confirmed. The unseen portions of CitâNia may ultimately contain the administrative center, religious sanctuary, workshops, or elite residences needed to explain how such a complex settlement functioned. But until excavation expands, those answers remain inaccessible beneath the ground. Hidden among the granite hills of central Portugal lies Bobadela Roman Forum, a place that raises one of the most perplexing questions in Roman archaeology. The visible ruins occupy only a small area within the modern village of Bobadela in Oliveira do Hospital, yet the scale of the surviving public architecture appears completely disproportionate to what historians believe was once a modest inland settlement. Archaeological excavations beginning in the 19th century uncovered the remains of a monumental forum, a triumphal arch constructed from massive granite blocks, administrative buildings, paved streets, inscriptions, and fragments of temples dating primarily between the 1st and 4th centuries AD, when the region formed part of the Roman province of Lusitania. What initially seemed to be the ordinary remains of a provincial town gradually evolved into a mystery, because every new discovery suggested a level of investment, organization, and political importance far beyond what such a settlement should have possessed, while the majority of the ancient city still remains hidden beneath the modern village, preventing archaeologists from seeing the complete picture. The greatest mystery surrounding Bobadela is why Rome invested so heavily in constructing an elaborate civic center at this location in the first place. Roman forums served as the political, judicial, commercial, and religious heart of a city, and they were normally reserved for municipalities with significant populations or strategic importance. Yet estimates suggest that Bobadela may have housed only several thousand inhabitants during its peak. Despite this relatively modest size, the surviving forum displays sophisticated urban planning, carefully aligned streets, monumental public buildings, and a triumphal gateway whose architectural quality rivals examples found in considerably larger Roman cities across the Iberian Peninsula. The surviving arch, built from enormous granite ashlar blocks, fitted with remarkable precision without modern machinery, has remained standing for nearly 2,000 years, despite earthquakes, weathering, centuries of reuse, and the gradual collapse of surrounding structures. This disparity between the apparent size of the settlement and the monumental character of its civic architecture continues to challenge conventional interpretations of the site's original function. One explanation proposes that Bobadela served as an administrative capital, controlling a much larger rural territory than previously recognized. Rather than functioning simply as a town, it may have operated as the legal and economic center for numerous surrounding communities spread across the mountainous interior of Lusitania. Such a role would explain the construction of a large forum capable of accommodating officials, merchants, tax collectors, and judicial proceedings arriving from distant settlements. However, direct archaeological evidence confirming this elevated administrative status remains surprisingly limited. Inscriptions discovered at the site reveal the presence of Roman civic institutions and local elites, but none explicitly explain why Bobadela received such ambitious public investment. As a result, archaeologists continue debating whether the forum reflects genuine regional importance or whether the visible ruins represent only a fraction of a much larger urban complex whose remaining structures still lie undiscovered beneath the modern landscape. That possibility introduces an even greater mystery. Current excavated remains represent only a very small percentage of the ancient city, because modern houses, streets, and infrastructure occupy most of the archaeological area. Excavation beneath an inhabited village is both technically difficult and economically impractical, meaning that large-scale exploration has never been possible. Ground investigations and scattered discoveries suggest that additional streets, residential quarters, public buildings, workshops, and perhaps even bath complexes extend beneath present-day Bobadela, but their exact locations remain unknown. Every construction project occasionally reveals fragments of Roman walls or artifacts before being documented and reburied, reinforcing the possibility that an extensive urban landscape survives almost entirely concealed beneath the village. Consequently, everything visitors see today may represent only the monumental center of a city whose true dimensions remain impossible to measure without excavating the community built directly above it. The engineering of the surviving architecture presents another unanswered question. The triumphal arch alone demonstrates extraordinary stoneworking precision using locally quarried granite, one of the hardest construction materials available in Western Iberia. Individual blocks weighing several tons were cut, transported, lifted, and positioned with remarkable accuracy, despite the absence of iron cranes, hydraulic machinery, or modern surveying equipment. Roman engineers undoubtedly possessed sophisticated lifting devices powered by treadwheel cranes and compound pulley systems capable of raising loads exceeding several tons, yet the logistical organization required to quarry, transport, and assemble so much granite in an inland mountainous region remains difficult to reconstruct. No surviving written records describe the construction process at Bobadela specifically, leaving historians to infer techniques from comparable Roman projects. The precise quarry locations supplying every block, the transportation routes used across rugged terrain, and the organization of labor responsible for the monument all remain uncertain despite decades of archaeological research. Equally puzzling is the remarkable survival of the forum itself. Throughout late antiquity and the medieval period, countless Roman cities across Iberia were dismantled as dressed stone became a convenient source of building material for churches, castles, bridges, and private houses. Bobadela certainly experienced extensive stone reuse, yet its monumental arch survived when similar structures elsewhere disappeared almost entirely. Researchers attribute part of this resilience to the exceptional durability of granite, whose compressive strength commonly exceeds 150 megapascals, combined with Roman construction techniques emphasizing balanced load distribution and tightly fitted masonry requiring little mortar. Nevertheless, these engineering principles alone cannot fully explain why this particular monument remained standing while surrounding buildings vanished. Whether its survival resulted from structural superiority, fortunate geography, continuous local respect, or simple historical chance remains impossible to determine with certainty. The disappearance of Bobadela from history raises perhaps the most haunting question of all. During the Roman Empire, the settlement clearly possessed sufficient wealth and organization to justify monumental civic construction. Yet after imperial authority weakened during the 4th and 5th centuries AD, historical references become increasingly scarce. Unlike famous Roman cities that evolved continuously into medieval centers, Bobadela gradually lost its prominence. Archaeologists have found evidence of continued occupation into the Visigothic period, but the exact sequence of decline remains poorly understood. No surviving contemporary account explains whether economic collapse, administrative reorganization, changing trade routes, political instability, epidemic disease, or repeated invasions caused the town to fade into obscurity. By the medieval era, much of the Roman city had already disappeared beneath newer construction, preserving fragments while simultaneously concealing the broader story of its transformation. Modern archaeological technology continues revealing new details without resolving the central mystery. Remote sensing, architectural analysis, ceramic studies, coin discoveries, and epigraphic research have refined the chronology of occupation and confirmed that Bobadela participated in the wider economic and political networks of Roman Lusitania. Imported ceramics, locally produced building materials, and official inscriptions demonstrate integration into imperial administration, while architectural comparisons indicate that the Forum followed standardized Roman planning principles adapted to local conditions. Yet these discoveries only deepen the paradox. Everything recovered so far confirms that Bobadela behaved like a significant urban center, while the visible scale of the settlement still appears too small to justify the monumental investment preserved today. Until extensive excavation beneath the modern village becomes possible, the true extent, population, and function of the ancient city may remain permanently hidden. Bobadela Roman Forum therefore represents far more than an isolated collection of ruins. It embodies a historical contradiction that challenges assumptions about how the Roman Empire organized its provincial landscape. A seemingly modest settlement possesses the civic architecture of a far more important city, while most of the evidence needed to explain that contradiction remains buried beneath inhabited ground that cannot easily be excavated. Nearly 2,000 years after Roman engineers erected its granite monuments, the surviving Forum continues to stand as silent evidence of a city whose real scale, influence, and purpose have never been fully understood. Every newly uncovered wall answers one question while exposing several more, ensuring that Bobadela remains not only one of Portugal's most overlooked Roman sites, but also one of the country's most enduring archaeological mysteries. Khornabuji Castle rises above the eastern plains of Georgia on an isolated limestone ridge overlooking the fertile valleys of the Iori and Alazani rivers, a location so steep that it seems almost impossible for an ancient fortress to exist there at all. Perched more than 700 meters above sea level in the historic region of Kakheti, the Citadel dominates one of the most important natural corridors connecting the Caucasus with the southern lowlands. Archaeological excavations beginning in the 1970s uncovered massive fortification walls, residential quarters, storage facilities, ceramics, iron tools, bronze objects, glass fragments, and coins spanning many centuries, revealing that the ruins visible today represent only a small surviving portion of what was once a thriving fortified city. Historical texts first mention Khornabuji during the 5th century under King Vakhtang Gorgasali, yet excavated pottery and construction techniques suggest that the earliest occupation may extend back to at least the late 1st millennium BC, raising one of the site's greatest mysteries. If the fortress truly predates the earliest written records, who first selected this seemingly impossible mountain and possessed the knowledge to transform it into one of eastern Georgia's strongest defensive positions? The greatest puzzle surrounding Khornabuji is not its age but its location. The fortress occupies an elongated rocky summit with sheer cliffs protecting several sides naturally, leaving only a narrow approach where defensive walls were concentrated. Modern visitors climb steep stone paths simply to reach the entrance, making it difficult to imagine how ancient builders transported thousands of limestone blocks, timber beams, lime mortar, water, food, and construction equipment to the summit without cranes, wheeled machinery, or engineered mountain roads. Many of the surviving curtain walls measure several meters in thickness, while towers were positioned to command every possible access route below. Engineers today understand the principles required to build on steep terrain, yet reconstructing the exact sequence followed by builders more than 15 centuries ago remains largely speculative because no contemporary construction records have survived. Archaeologists can identify rebuilding phases through masonry styles and mortar composition, but they cannot explain precisely how heavy materials were hauled safely onto such an unforgiving ridge, or how workers stabilized foundations resting directly on fractured limestone, exposed to earthquakes, erosion, and seasonal temperature extremes. Even more intriguing is the remarkable decision to establish an entire urban center beneath and around the fortress, instead of choosing the surrounding plains where agriculture and transportation would have been significantly easier. Excavations indicate that Khornabuji was not merely a military outpost, but the administrative heart of an extensive settlement controlling regional trade routes crossing eastern Georgia. The surrounding valleys produced grain, grapes, livestock, and salt, while the fortress overlooked roads linking the Caucasus Mountains with Armenia, Persia, and the Black Sea region. From its elevated position, defenders could observe movement across dozens of kilometers, allowing rapid communication and military response long before enemies reached the city itself. Yet this strategic advantage came at an extraordinary logistical cost. Every stone required for new fortifications, every barrel of water during dry seasons, every food supply during sieges, and every building material for expansion had to be carried uphill through an extremely narrow route. The enormous investment suggests that the location offered advantages considered essential by its builders. But exactly which threats justified such an ambitious undertaking remains uncertain, because surviving historical sources provide only fragmented accounts. The fortress itself demonstrates an advanced understanding of defensive architecture integrated directly into natural geology. Instead of forcing the landscape to fit the walls, ancient engineers allowed the mountain to become part of the fortification system. Massive limestone outcrops formed natural barriers, while masonry filled only vulnerable gaps where attackers could approach. Internal terraces created space for buildings, despite the uneven terrain, and carved stairways connected different defensive levels without exposing soldiers unnecessarily to enemy fire. Large storage chambers suggest preparation for prolonged sieges, while cisterns collected and preserved rainwater on the summit, reducing dependence on external springs. Although these engineering solutions are visible today, important questions remain unanswered. How large was the original water storage capacity? Were underground tunnels once connected to hidden springs? Did wooden defensive structures disappear entirely through decay, leaving archaeologists with only stone foundations? The absence of surviving timber architecture prevents researchers from fully reconstructing how the fortress functioned during its peak. Archaeological discoveries have also revealed that the visible ruins represent only one chapter in a much longer sequence of occupation. Layers of collapsed masonry show repeated cycles of destruction and rebuilding across many centuries. Ceramic typology indicates continuous habitation through the early medieval period, while recovered coins demonstrate long-distance commercial connections extending far beyond the immediate region. Every rebuilding phase modified existing walls instead of replacing them completely, creating a complex architectural puzzle in which stones from different centuries coexist within the same structures. This layered construction complicates attempts to determine which sections belong to the earliest fortress and which reflect later political or military changes. Advanced surveying methods including photogrammetry, laser scanning, and geological mapping continue to identify hidden structural phases, yet no complete reconstruction has achieved scholarly consensus because too much of the original fortress has disappeared. Historical accounts describe Khornabuji as an important political and military center, until successive invasions gradually weakened its power. Mongol campaigns during the 13th century damaged much of eastern Georgia, while later conflicts further reduced the settlement's strategic importance. The final catastrophe came during the campaigns of Shah Abbas I of Persia in the early 17th century, when large portions of Kakheti were devastated, populations displaced, and fortified settlements abandoned. Strangely, despite retaining one of the strongest natural defensive positions in the region, Khornabuji was never restored to its former prominence. Many medieval fortresses across Europe and Western Asia were repeatedly rebuilt after warfare, yet this citadel slowly fell into silence. Historians explain its decline through political change, shifting trade routes, and demographic collapse. But these explanations do not fully answer why such an exceptionally defensible location ceased to serve as a major regional stronghold. Nocera Superiore, in the Campania region of southern Italy, conceals one of the Roman world's most overlooked archaeological mysteries beneath the streets of a modern town. Known in antiquity as Nuceria Alfaterna, the city occupied a strategic position roughly 20 kilometers southeast of Pompeii, along the ancient roads connecting Capua, Salernum, and the Bay of Naples. Archaeological evidence suggests the settlement emerged during the 6th century BCE under the influence of the Oscan-speaking peoples before becoming an important Samnite center and later a prosperous Roman municipality. Ancient writers described Nocera as a significant urban center, and its estimated population during the early Roman Empire may have exceeded 15,000 inhabitants, supported by fertile volcanic soils, regional trade, and an extensive transportation network. Yet unlike Pompeii or Herculaneum, whose destruction froze them in time beneath volcanic ash, Nocera never disappeared in a single catastrophic event. Instead, it remained continuously occupied for more than 2,000 years, allowing each generation to build directly upon the ruins of the last, until one of southern Italy's largest Roman cities gradually vanished beneath an entirely different landscape. This unusual history created a mystery that continues to challenge archaeologists, because the city was never truly lost, yet its complete form has never been found. The first clues emerged during scattered excavations beginning in the 18th century, but systematic archaeological investigations accelerated only during the 20th century, as construction projects repeatedly exposed buried walls, roads, tombs, inscriptions, and monumental architecture beneath the expanding modern municipality of Nocera Superiore. Excavations have revealed portions of an amphitheatre measuring approximately 110 meters in length, a Roman theatre capable of accommodating several thousand spectators, sections of defensive walls extending for more than 2 kilometers, paved streets aligned according to Roman urban planning principles, aqueduct remains, drainage systems, residential buildings, necropolises containing hundreds of burials, and countless architectural fragments reused in later constructions. Each discovery confirmed that ancient Nocera had been a thriving provincial city with sophisticated infrastructure comparable to many better-known Roman settlements. Yet these discoveries also introduced an unexpected problem. None of the monuments connect into a complete urban plan because modern houses, churches, roads, and utilities occupy nearly every unexplored area. Archaeologists possess hundreds of isolated pieces, but the overall layout of the city remains incomplete, making Nocera one of the rare Roman municipalities whose existence is well documented while its true form remains largely hidden. This uncertainty extends far beyond missing streets. Researchers still cannot identify with confidence the precise location of the city's central forum, the administrative heart where political, commercial, and religious life would have converged. Every major Roman city possessed such a space, yet despite decades of excavation, the Forum of Nocera has never been conclusively located. Several possible areas have been proposed based on architectural remains and inscriptions, but none has produced definitive evidence linking it to the civic center described by Roman urban traditions. The absence is particularly striking because inscriptions recovered throughout Campania confirm that Nocera held municipal status and possessed the institutions expected of an important Roman community. The city clearly functioned as a regional center, yet the physical core around which its civic identity revolved remains concealed beneath the modern town. This paradox continues to frustrate archaeological reconstruction because without the forum, interpreting the relationship between public buildings, markets, temples, and transportation routes becomes far more speculative. Even more intriguing is the remarkable sequence of civilizations preserved beneath the site. Excavations reveal a vertical archive of nearly 3,000 years of continuous occupation. The deepest layers belong to early Oscan communities, established before Roman expansion. Above them appear Samnite structures dating between the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, followed by increasingly monumental Roman construction after the city's incorporation into the Republic. Later layers preserve late Roman modifications, early Christian architecture beginning in the 5th and 6th centuries CE, medieval rebuilding, Renaissance occupation, and finally the modern urban landscape. In some excavation trenches, archaeologists encounter 6 or 7 distinct construction phases stacked within only a few meters of soil. Each generation dismantled earlier buildings, reused stone blocks, recycled columns, and leveled previous streets before constructing new ones directly overhead. Rather than preserving a single historical moment, Nocera became a continuously evolving city whose own inhabitants systematically buried their past. This extraordinary continuity explains why recovering the ancient city has proven so difficult, because excavating one period often requires removing valuable evidence from another equally significant era. Among the most debated monuments is the baptistry of Santa Maria Maggiore, commonly known as the Rotonda, one of southern Italy's oldest surviving Christian structures. The octagonal baptistry, generally dated to the 6th century CE, contains architectural elements unmistakably taken from earlier Roman buildings, including marble columns, capitals, and carved stone reused through the practice known as spolia. Yet the mystery extends beneath these visible features. Archaeological investigations suggest that the Christian complex rests upon an older monumental structure whose original identity remains uncertain. Some scholars have proposed a Roman temple dedicated to an unknown deity, while others argue for a bath complex, a civic building, or another ceremonial monument. Foundations discovered below the Christian floor plan fail to match any single interpretation completely, and no surviving inscription identifies the earlier building. The Rotonda therefore embodies one of Nocera's most enduring questions, because its Christian builders intentionally incorporated fragments of a forgotten Roman monument, whose original purpose disappeared from historical memory long before the baptistry itself was constructed. The city's disappearance becomes even more remarkable when compared with nearby Pompeii, located less than 20 kilometers away. Pompeii survived because Mount Vesuvius buried it beneath approximately 4 to 6 meters of volcanic deposits during the eruption of 79 CE, sealing streets, houses, and public buildings in an extraordinary archaeological time capsule. Nocera, by contrast, escaped complete destruction despite also suffering damage during the eruption. Instead of being abandoned, the settlement recovered and continued evolving through late antiquity and the Middle Ages. Ironically, survival proved more destructive than catastrophe. Continuous rebuilding erased ancient neighborhoods, dismantled Roman monuments for construction material, altered street alignments, and gradually obscured the city's original layout beneath centuries of development. What nature preserved at Pompeii, human occupation slowly concealed at Nocera. Modern remote sensing technologies, including ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, aerial photogrammetry, and LiDAR surveys, have identified numerous buried anomalies beneath the contemporary town, suggesting that substantial portions of the Roman city remain intact, below buildings that cannot realistically be removed for large-scale excavation. Holy Ghost Citadel in Luxembourg City is one of the few places in Europe where nearly 8 centuries of history were built directly on top of themselves, creating an archaeological puzzle that continues to challenge researchers today. What appears on the surface as a medieval fortress is in reality only the latest visible layer of a much deeper story. Beneath its walls lie forgotten churches, monastic buildings, cemeteries, military structures, tunnels, and foundations belonging to different civilizations, each generation constructing its own world without completely erasing the one beneath. The result is not simply a fortress, but a vertical city of history whose true size and complexity remain unknown. The story began in 1234, when a convent dedicated to the Holy Spirit was founded on the Saint-Esprit plateau overlooking the Alzette Valley. Rising nearly 70 meters above the river, the limestone plateau provided an ideal defensive position while remaining close to important trade routes crossing the region. The religious community gradually expanded the site with churches, cloisters, workshops, gardens, storerooms, and living quarters. Over time, the convent became an important institution within medieval Luxembourg, yet no one could have imagined that it would eventually disappear beneath centuries of military construction. The transformation of the peaceful monastery into one of Europe's strongest fortifications remains one of the site's greatest historical mysteries, because written records rarely describe how older structures were incorporated into the expanding defenses. As Luxembourg grew into a strategic crossroads contested by Burgundy, Spain, France, Austria, and other European powers, the plateau became increasingly valuable. Rather than abandoning the monastery, engineers repeatedly surrounded it with stronger defensive works. Massive retaining walls, artillery platforms, bastions, underground magazines, and fortified gateways gradually enclosed the original religious complex. Every new military project reused earlier foundations whenever possible, saving enormous quantities of labor while unintentionally preserving fragments of previous centuries beneath new layers of stone. Archaeologists now believe that almost every phase of construction left portions of older buildings sealed below later fortifications, creating an extraordinarily complicated sequence of overlapping architecture. The most dramatic transformation arrived after 1684, when the French army captured Luxembourg following a siege lasting several weeks. King Louis XIV ordered his legendary military engineer, Sébastien le Prestre de Vauban, to modernize the city's defenses. Vauban recognized that the Saint-Esprit plateau controlled one of the most vulnerable approaches into the fortress and redesigned the entire area into a powerful artillery position. Enormous earthworks were added above medieval structures, new bastions projected outward to eliminate blind angles, and underground passages connected strategic positions throughout the plateau. Although Vauban's engineering achievements are well documented elsewhere in Europe, historians still debate exactly how much of Holy Ghost Citadel represents entirely new construction and how much reused earlier Spanish and medieval defenses hidden inside the walls. The fortress visible today is therefore a combination of multiple engineering traditions rather than the work of a single era. The greatest mystery, however, lies beneath the surface rather than above it. During archaeological excavations conducted before the construction of Luxembourg's modern judicial complex, researchers uncovered astonishing evidence that the visible fortress represents only a fraction of the site's true history. Excavations exposed the foundations of the medieval convent, sections of ancient walls, stone pavements, painted plaster, drainage systems, storage rooms, and approximately 300 burials associated with the religious community. Instead of finding isolated ruins, archaeologists discovered entire architectural layers preserved one above another, like pages inside an enormous stone archive. Every excavation trench seemed to reveal another period of occupation, suggesting that much of the plateau still conceals structures that have never been documented. This discovery raised a question that remains unanswered today. How many historical layers still survive beneath the Saint-Esprit plateau? Modern excavations have investigated only limited sections because most of the area is occupied by standing buildings and essential urban infrastructure. Large portions cannot simply be excavated without threatening modern construction above them. Ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, and archaeological surveys indicate that additional masonry, buried chambers, and structural anomalies remain underground, but their exact nature is unknown. Every new construction project has the potential to uncover another forgotten chapter of the fortress, making Holy Ghost Citadel a site where archaeology advances only a few square meters at a time. Another remarkable feature is the underground military network connected to the fortress. Holy Ghost Citadel formed part of Luxembourg's immense defensive system, a labyrinth of galleries, magazines, tunnels, staircases, and protected communication routes carved directly into solid rock. These underground works eventually became part of the famous casemate system, for which Luxembourg earned the nickname Gibraltar of the North. Some passages reached several kilometers in total length throughout the city and were designed to shelter soldiers, store ammunition, transport supplies, and protect artillery crews from enemy bombardment. Yet even today, historians cannot reconstruct the complete layout of every underground connection because many passages were intentionally destroyed, sealed, or collapsed after the 19th century. One of the most intriguing aspects of Holy Ghost Citadel is that destruction may actually have preserved its secrets. Under the Treaty of London in 1867, Luxembourg's enormous fortress was ordered to be dismantled in order to guarantee the country's neutrality. Thousands of workers spent roughly 16 years demolishing bastions, ramparts, artillery positions, and military buildings that had made Luxembourg one of Europe's strongest fortified cities. Millions of cubic meters of masonry disappeared, while many underground structures were filled or abandoned. Ironically, the demolition buried countless archaeological remains beneath layers of rubble instead of completely removing them. Modern excavations therefore encounter a confusing mixture of medieval monasteries, 17th century fortifications, 18th century military modifications, 19th century demolition debris, and modern urban construction occupying the same physical space. Eburobrittium, hidden beneath the fields near modern Óbidos on Portugal's Atlantic coast, is one of the few Roman cities whose existence was documented by ancient writers, yet whose location disappeared so completely that historians searched unsuccessfully for nearly 2,000 years. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder listed Eburobrittium among the important settlements of Lusitania during the 1st century AD, proving that the city once flourished as part of the Western Roman Empire, but after the empire declined, its exact position gradually faded from memory. Medieval towns developed elsewhere, coastlines changed, marshes expanded, and generations passed without anyone knowing where the city had stood. Archaeologists proposed numerous locations across central Portugal throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, but every theory eventually failed because none produced convincing archaeological evidence. The mystery survived until 1994, when construction work for the A8 motorway unexpectedly exposed buried Roman masonry beneath agricultural land. Rescue excavations soon revealed that workers had accidentally uncovered the lost city itself, transforming what began as an ordinary infrastructure project into one of Portugal's most remarkable archaeological discoveries. Even today, the excavated area represents only a fraction of the ancient settlement, leaving much of Eburobrittium hidden underground and raising the possibility that its greatest secrets remain untouched beneath surrounding farmland. As excavations expanded, archaeologists uncovered a remarkably organized Roman urban center covering several hectares, with evidence suggesting the entire city may have occupied more than 20 hectares during its peak between the 1st and 4th centuries AD. At its heart stood a monumental forum measuring approximately 70 by 90 meters, surrounded by colonnades, administrative buildings, commercial spaces, and a basilica where legal and civic affairs were conducted. 11 tabernae, or Roman shops, lined sections of the complex, indicating an active commercial economy connected to regional trade. Nearby stood an elaborate bath complex, supplied by carefully engineered hydraulic systems that transported and drained water through underground channels built with extraordinary precision. Stone-paved streets intersected at right angles, according to Roman planning principles, while drainage systems beneath the roads demonstrate sophisticated engineering capable of managing seasonal rainfall. Fragments of imported amphorae, fine terra sigillata pottery from Gaul and Hispania, glass vessels, bronze objects, coins, and construction materials reveal that Eburobrittium participated in extensive commercial networks stretching across the Mediterranean. Rather than an isolated provincial settlement, it functioned as a prosperous urban center integrated into one of history's largest economic systems. Yet despite the impressive discoveries, the greatest mystery surrounding Eburobrittium is not how it was built, but how an entire Roman city vanished so completely that its location became impossible to identify for nearly 2 millennia. Unlike Pompeii, whose destruction was frozen beneath volcanic ash, or many Roman cities abandoned after obvious catastrophes, Eburobrittium shows no convincing evidence of violent destruction. Archaeologists have found no widespread burn layer indicating a massive fire, no destruction horizon associated with warfare, and no clear geological evidence of a catastrophic earthquake capable of erasing the settlement. Buildings appear instead to have been gradually abandoned, leaving historians searching for a slower process capable of removing an entire city from history without dramatic ruins attracting later attention. This absence of a definitive destruction event makes Eburobrittium unusually difficult to explain, because civilizations generally leave recognizable traces when they collapse suddenly, whereas here, the disappearance appears almost silent. One leading hypothesis centers on geography rather than conflict. During the Roman period, the city stood close to an extensive coastal lagoon connected to the Atlantic Ocean, providing convenient access for trade and transportation. Geological studies indicate that over many centuries, sediment transported by rivers and coastal currents progressively filled sections of the lagoon, altering shorelines and reducing navigability. As the water retreated and marshes expanded, ports that once supported commerce may have become increasingly unusable. Even relatively small environmental changes could have transformed regional trade routes, because Roman merchants depended heavily upon maritime transport, which remained vastly more efficient than moving bulk goods over land. If Eburobrittium gradually lost direct access to navigable waterways, its commercial importance may have declined generation after generation until economic activity shifted elsewhere. The remarkable aspect of this theory is that no single catastrophic event would have been necessary. Instead, slow environmental transformation occurring over centuries could ultimately erase an important city from practical memory. However, this explanation introduces another unresolved puzzle. Many Roman settlements survived changing coastlines by adapting their harbors or relocating commercial infrastructure, yet Eburobrittium appears to have been abandoned almost entirely. Archaeologists continue debating whether political instability during the late Roman Empire accelerated the process, whether changing administrative boundaries redirected investment toward neighboring settlements, or whether repeated economic crises simply made maintaining the city impossible. Coins recovered from excavations indicate occupation continued into the 4th century AD, but evidence afterward becomes increasingly scarce. Exactly when the final inhabitants departed remains uncertain, because no written source records the city's abandonment. The silence of historical documents is striking. Roman writers described the city when it prospered, yet none explained why it disappeared, leaving archaeology to reconstruct a story that ancient historians themselves never preserved. The rediscovery of Eburobrittium also presents another extraordinary mystery, because only a small percentage of the ancient settlement has actually been excavated. Modern archaeological investigations have concentrated primarily on the monumental center exposed during motorway construction, while extensive geophysical surveys suggest additional buried structures extend well beyond the explored area. Magnetometry and ground investigations indicate roads, buildings, and possible residential districts remain beneath cultivated fields that continue to be used for agriculture. Excavating an entire Roman city would require enormous financial investment, decades of work, and careful negotiation with modern landowners. Consequently, much of Eburobrittium remains effectively sealed beneath the soil, creating the unusual situation in which archaeologists know the city exists but have seen only a limited portion of it. Every new excavation season, therefore, carries the possibility of revealing unknown public buildings, workshops, temples, warehouses, or inscriptions capable of changing current interpretations. The city's commercial character creates additional unanswered questions about the scale of its economic importance. The forum and numerous shops demonstrate organized trade, while imported ceramics reveal long-distance exchange with regions hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. Amphora fragments once carried olive oil, wine, fish sauce, and other commodities essential to Roman commerce. Fine terra sigillata pottery, manufactured in specialized production centers across Gaul and Hispania, reached Eburobrittium through remarkably efficient supply networks. Yet archaeologists still cannot determine whether the city functioned primarily as a regional marketplace, an administrative capital, or an important redistribution center connected with Atlantic maritime routes. The archaeological evidence supports all three possibilities to varying degrees, but no surviving inscription clearly defines the city's precise economic role. Until larger sections of the settlement are excavated, its true position within Roman Lusitania remains uncertain.